If I only had 15 hours a week for poker and could only play low stakes, here's how I'd make 50K plus a year. Now, most part-time players think they can't compete. I hear stuff like,
Mark, I've got a job and family. I can't put in the hours these guys do. I can't make real money at low stakes with limited hours. Part-time players can't beat players who do this full-time.
I'm going to show you why all of that is wrong. I've made over 7 figures in poker, and our system has helped over 500 students to crush these games. And a huge majority of them have jobs, families, and limited hours to dedicate to poker. They're not playing full-time, but they're absolutely beating up a lot of the players who are. So if I had a job, I'm going to show you the 5 building blocks I'd use to maximize your edge at the table, get the most out of your study time, and let you run circles around the pros grinding 40 hours a week. Now look, we don't make income claims or guarantees. In fact, if you think you're gonna earn 50K part-time from poker just from watching a YouTube video from some guy with neck tattoos and a mustache, you might be delusional. But if you're a part-time player who's tired of feeling like you can't compete, I'm going to show you the roadmap. All right, the first thing we got to work on if we want to make 50K plus a year from poker part-time, we have to learn to range. We need to put our opponent on a range of hands, and ideally, we got to get really, really fast at this. But first, let's start simple. So to kind of get a grasp on this to get started, I like to have students start visually because it allows them to kind of wrap their brains around this and start putting the pieces together. So let me show you. All right, so we're playing 2-5. We're going to open in the cutoff, and now the button is going to 3-bet, and it folds back around to us. And already we want to start off here. What is the button's range? And let's assume this is a typical recreational player. Look, they're not going crazy 3-betting, but they know they have the button. They know they can 3-bet quite a bit here. And it's not some old man coffee who's just 3-betting pocket queens plus or something like that. So maybe their 3-bet range on the button looks something like this. So we are going to call. We go to a flop, which comes queen 8-4. We check it over, and our opponent c-bets 460 into 167. Now, has our opponent's range changed here? And this is the question. And I would say generally when they c-bet small in a 3-bet pot, a lot of players, even recreational players, may just be c-betting their entire range for a small size. So we can't really take too much away from this action. So we are going to call with top pair. We go to a turn, which is a 3. We check it over, and our opponent checks it back. Now at this point, has their range changed? And I would say, yes, it's changed quite a bit after they've checked back this turn on a wet dynamic board. So at this point, we can probably start eliminating hands like aces, kings, queens, pocket 8s, ace queen suited, king queen suited, queen jack suited, king queen offsuit, ace queen offsuit. Maybe they still have some of the queen 10. So at this point, maybe their range looks something like this. You see, we have eliminated quite a few hands from their range. So we're going to go to the river, which is an offsuit ace. And we're going to talk later on about how we decide here whether we're going to check, whether we're going to bet small, whether we're going to bet big, but I will save that for a little bit later in the video. So spoiler alert, we are going to check here, and now our opponent bets small on this river for 120. So at this point, what is our opponent's range? So I think at this point we can eliminate the jacks, the 10s, the 9s, maybe the 8x, right? These hands are not going to be betting here on this river. We could probably also eliminate the queen 10 suited. That hand's not just going to be monkey betting when an ace comes on the river in position. So our opponent's range is going to look something like this, right? They've got quite a lot of top pair here, and then maybe they've got a few kind of whiffs that gave up on the turn because they didn't really have anything going on, and now these hands are bluffing on the river. All right, so that's always how I like to get started. Start off visually, but the thing is, when we're at the table, we're not going to be able to bring like a little chart and color in what they have, what they don't have, right? We need to be able to get to the point where we can carry this over and actually use this at the table. So after we've done a bunch of reps visually, maybe we do several hundred reps, we just start to get the idea down, get a little bit comfortable with it. The next step here in the process is we want to be able to do this out loud when we're practicing, right? So how I would start after getting comfortable doing it visually, start with big buckets, right? We're going to start early in the hand. We're not going to nail down specific combos they have. No, we're going to think in terms of big picture buckets. What do they have? And then as we go through the hand, by the time we get to the river, then we can talk about specific hands they have. But a big mistake, pre-flop, on the flop, even on the turn, we're not going to talk about specific hands. We're going to keep everything broad in big buckets. And the final point here, we need to be able to carry that thread. So if we have the range pre-flop as, hey, they've got very good hands, they've got aces, they've got kings, they 3-bet, you know, and then we get to the river and all of a sudden we're thinking, oh, you know, maybe they could have 7 deuce here because no. We need to be able to carry the thread from street to street to street. So again, we're going to start with big buckets. We're going to assign specific hands only late in the hand, and we need to carry that thread. So let me show you how this is done. All right, so we are going to open in a cutoff once again. Our opponent is going to 3-bet, and at this point, what is our opponent's range? Well, let's think in big buckets. Upper left-hand corner of that hand balloon chart, they're just going to have good hands, right? Maybe the good suited broadways, maybe mid-pocket pairs and up, maybe the best offsuit hands like ace king and ace queen, right? We're just going to start in big buckets. They have good hands. So we are going to call. We're going to go to a flop, which is queen 8-4. We check it over, and what is our opponent's range when they c-bet small? Again, this c-bet may not tell us much about their range. They still just have good hands, right? Now we are going to go to the turn. We check it over, and our opponent double barrels here on the turn. So at this point, what is our opponent's range? At this point, if we're still thinking in big buckets, their range is going to be some can play for stacks hands, like pocket queens or pocket eights. They're going to have some thick value hands, maybe some queen X, some pocket kings, pocket aces, right? And they're going to have some high equity draws, maybe some flush draws, right? Maybe some combo draws, right? And then finally, if our opponent is somewhat aggressive, maybe they have some low equity draws here as well, some gut shots, right? So we're thinking in big buckets, right? Can play for stacks hands, thick value, high equity, low equity. What we can do here is we can eliminate hands like pocket nines, pocket tens, pocket jack. Those hands aren't going to double barrel here, right? And maybe when they do double barrel in a 3-bet pot, we can eliminate some of the air, like king jack of spades or something like that, right? So we've eliminated the showdown value, we've eliminated the air, and we've narrowed our opponent's range to can play for stacks, thick value, high equity draws, and low equity draws. So we are going to call. We're going to go to a river, which is an ace. We check it over, and now our opponent goes all in. At this point, what is our opponent's range? So on this river, our opponent is 3-bet pre-flop, c-bet on the flop, double barrel big on the turn. Now they've gone all in on an ace river. And when our opponent jams on this river, what is our opponent's range going to be? It's going to be can play for stacks hands like ace queen, pocket eights, pocket queens, right? For value. That's going to be our opponent's range for value. Or it's going to be some busted draws, right? Maybe some hands like jack 10 of hearts, king jack of hearts, stuff like that. What they're probably not going to have on this river is the showdown value. Again, a hand like pocket kings now might check back. We'd already eliminated hands like nines, tens, jacks, stuff like that. Also on this river, what they're probably not going to have are thin value hands like ace 5 of hearts or ace 10 of hearts or something like that. Those hands may not jam on this river. So their range on this river is going to be 2-pair plus or busted draws. So let me show you one more example. We're going to open with queen jack again. Our opponent 3-bets, and when our opponent 3-bets on the button, what is their range? It's going to be good hands again, right? Some of the suited broadways, middling pairs, and up to the premium pairs, and their very best offsuit hands. Ace queen off, ace king off, something like that. So we are going to call. We go to a flop, queen 8-4. We check, and now our opponent checks back. And when our opponent checks back on this flop, what is their range? Well, at this point, when they check back as the pre-flop 3-better, we can probably start eliminating a lot of the thick value hands. We don't want to get too specific too early in the hand. We want to think in terms of big buckets, but we can eliminate a lot of the thick value. And if you're curious what the thick value is, I wouldn't start thinking in terms of specific hands yet, but just to let you know what the thick value is, maybe hands like ace queen, pocket kings, pocket aces, those hands would probably just bet right away. We can probably start eliminating a lot of the high equity draws, the combo draws as well, because those hands would probably bet right away. Certainly if they had a hand like jack 10 of hearts or ace king of hearts, a lot of those hands may just start betting here. Not all the time, but again, most of the time those hands would start betting. So what is their range when they check back on this flop? Going to be some showdown value, going to be some thin value, maybe hands like jacks, tens, nines, something like that. Going to be some airballs that just flop nothing here. And possibly, they could occasionally have a can play for stacks hand where they just smash this board. Maybe a hand like specifically pocket queens, something like like that. So we are going to go to the turn. The turn is a 3. Once again, we're going to talk about later on in the video how we decide if we're going to bet small here, if we're going to bet large here, if we're going to check. So stay tuned. We're going to cover that in detail. But in this spot, we decide to come out and bet 100, and our opponent is going to raise to 400. So again, what is our opponent's range? So on the flop, we eliminated thick value, thin value, maybe some big draws. So what is their range when they check back and now raise on the turn? Well, we said on the flop they could have some air, right? Is this the line that air takes? If they're going to be aggressive with their low equity draws, what are they going to do on the flop as the pre-flop raiser? They're probably going to c-bet, right? So it's not going to be air that takes this line that checks back the flop and now raises on the turn when we come out for a significant size bet in a 3-bet pot, right? This is just incongruent. So we can eliminate air. What hand would make sense to check back the flop and now raise on the turn? Well, maybe a big combo draw, right? But a lot of the big combo draws, the big heart draws, would just bet on the flop. If they had 10-9 of hearts, right? A lot of these hands would just bet on the flop. So what type of combo draw makes sense now? Maybe they picked up diamonds. Maybe a hand like ace-5 of diamonds. Maybe a hand like jack-10 of diamonds. Okay, so they could have a combo draw. What other hand makes sense to raise here on the turn? Well, maybe a hand like pocket queens, right? They had to play for stacks hand, so they check back to kind of trap on the flop when they flop top set. Now they're getting a little bit nervous because there are multiple straight draws out there. There are 2 flush draws out there. They want to start piling in money right now. So their range when they raise on this turn going to be big combo draws and can play for stacks hands, okay? So we are going to call. We go to the river. The river is a 5 of diamonds. We check, and now our opponent jams. What is our opponent's range on this river? So I'm going to pause just for 5 seconds and let you guys figure this one out. All right, so what is their range on this river? Just going to be value, guys. Why is it going to be value? Well, all of the combo draws that would raise on the turn have now gotten there on the river. Hands like jack-10 of diamonds, hands like 10-9 of diamonds, right? So their big diamond draws that would play this way on the turn have gotten there, right? If they did have a heart combo draw, they would mostly bet that one on the flop, so they don't have a lot of missed draws here. And remember, on the turn, we also gave them hands like pocket queens, maybe occasionally a hand like pocket eights. So their range on this river is going to be sets and flushes, right? That is how to range. All right, so we've learned how to range, and now step 2 is going to be calibration. And calibration is simply a fancy word for pattern recognition. What does it mean when players do this? Or what does it mean when players do that? So I'm going to show you a bunch of patterns for pre-flop, flop, turns, rivers. You guys can jot these down. You guys can make notes, and you guys can start building your own list. But I'm going to give you a head start because I'm going to give you 5 patterns for each street that are very, very reliable for low stakes games. And you guys can kind of bank on these and start building your calibration from the ground up. All right, so we're going to start with pre-flop. And the first one is when a player limps from early position, they are not planning on folding, right? They're not planning on folding. They may be planning on limp calling, they may be planning on limp raising, but they're definitely not planning on limp folding. So let's take this into account. Let's say we see a player limp here and we have 8-6 of diamonds. This player has limped. We have multiple players behind us in position. What should we do? Well, this is pretty simple, guys, but I see players make this mistake all the time and just raise here or come in as an over limp. Not great, not great. This is a very easy fold. We should just be folding this because generally when players limp from early position, they're either going for a limp raise with top of their range, or they have hands they just don't feel comfortable raising. There's still going to be a much better hand than 8-6 of diamonds, right? They have some suited broadways, hands like queen 10 suited, king jack suited, maybe some hands like ace 5 suited, ace 9 suited. Maybe they've got some smaller pocket pairs like pocket 7s, pocket 8s, pocket 9s, whatever. Either way, they have us crushed. They're not planning on folding, so we should just get out of the way. Here's the corollary to this, guys. If we do see them limp and we've got a really great hand like pocket queens here, raising to 4x or 5x is just punting, right? Because we already said they're not planning on folding. So how do we exploit this? Go huge. Players are going to be most inelastic pre-flop. So if we do have a good hand here, we know they're not planning on folding from under the gun. The exploit on one side of the coin is when we have middling kind of garbage, kind of gapped suited connectors, we're just folding. When we have very good hands, we should just be raising absolutely huge because they are not planning on folding. Second pattern for pre-flop, when you see a cold 4-bet, it is absolutely nutted. All right, so let me show you what a cold 4-bet is. We open Quigley's here, and we are going to get 3-bet by horse on the button. And now a player in the big blind wakes up and puts in a 4-bet. So this player has not put any money into the pot so far besides their big blind. They've seen a raise and a re-raise in front of them, and now they've come in for a 4-bet. This is massively under bluffed because in general, low stakes players here are just going to cold call. They're just going to come in as a call when they have hands like ace king or pocket jacks or pocket tens or something like that. So what does it mean when they come in as a cold 4-bet? This is just going to be most of the time hands like aces, kings, and maybe if they get a wild hair up their ass, a hand like ace king suited. So for me here with queens, when we see a cold 4-bet, very, very standard fold. This is an easy fold unless we're against a very special aggressive player. All right, next pattern, guys. When you see somebody put in greater than 1/3 of their stack pre-flop, this again is absolutely nutted, and I would be making some ridiculous folds. So let me show you. All right, so we got Quigleys again. We're gonna open. We get 3-bet by the button, and when I'm out of position, especially when I get 3-bet by the button here, I like to go very linear from out of position, meaning good, better, best. Queens is going to fall into that range. I don't think our opponent's going to be folding a hand like ace queen suited or 10-9 or jack 10 suited or something like that when they are in position if we 4-bet to a reasonable size. So we're gonna 4-bet here expecting our opponent to make calling mistakes, and now our opponent min clicks to 450. This is much scarier, guys, than if they just 4-bet all in, right? Because is this the 5-bet size they would choose if they had a hand like pocket jacks or ace king? Probably not, right? If they had one of those hands, they would either call our 4-bet or they would just jam. What does this mean? They're trying to string us along. They have specifically pocket aces. And to be fair, I want to be clear here. I don't want to say they always have pocket aces because sometimes in this spot, they also have pocket aces. So guys, I would just fold. I would just fold. When our opponent puts in greater than 1/3 of their stack and we have a hand like pocket queens, very easy fold here. All right, guys, the next one, when you see the big blind or the player closing the action put in a 3-bet, this is just generally nutted. It's going to be way too strong of a range. All right, so we're going to open with ace queen, folds all the way around to the big blind, who now is going to 3-bet to 100. And why is this nutted, guys? First of all, they're going to be out of position, right? And second of all, they're closing the action. It's really easy just to come in as a call here, to put in another $20 and see a flop. So generally, in the big blind, in equilibrium, they're supposed to be 3-betting their very, very best hands and then maybe some bluffs, maybe the worst hands they would call with, right? Maybe some suited connectors, maybe some trash ace X suited, maybe some trash king X suited, but that just doesn't happen, right? They don't find the polar 3-bet bluffs. Those just don't get 3-bet. And they don't go linear with hands like tens or jacks or ace queen suited, right? Those hands just get called. So what does it mean when they 3-bet closing the action in the big blind? It's just going to be the strongest hands, right? All of the strongest hands. So in this spot, I would fold. All right, finally, guys, last one. Low stakes players in general, they just massively over defend to 3-bet. So there are very few scenarios where we want to have a polarized 3-bet or 4-bet range. Very, very few. Let's just throw those out the window for now. Let's just say as a generality against the population, we just want to be 3-betting linear because they're going to be calling too much pre-flop. So let me show you. Really good example here. Cutoff opens. We have a suited Broadway. Just 3-bet the crap out of them, guys. Number one, they're not going to 4-bet enough. Number two, they're just going to call too much, right? When they have hands like Jack 10 suited or Queen 10 suited or 10-9 suited or pocket sixes, they're just going to call. We're going to have the initiative. We're going to be able to play one of the most profitable spots in poker, a 3-bet pot heads up in position, right? We just want to out card them. And King Jack suited is doing quite well against a range that just isn't going to fold hands like 7-6 suited, right? Jack 9 suited, right? 9-7 suited. They're going to call with these hands. If they're going to call with worse hands, we need to be going linear, which is still our good hands, but just a much wider, much more linear range. This is how to exploit players who call too much. And in general, the pool calls 3-bets way too much. All right, let's move along to patterns for the flop. And guys, if you've watched any of these Hungry Horse videos, you're going to be familiar with this one. In general, our opponents tend to telegraph size much more when the flop is wet and dynamic than when the flop is dry and static. So let me show you a clear-cut example of this. All right, so we're going to open nines. Our opponent is going to call on the button. Flop comes Jack 9 deuce. Look at that sweet baby there. And this is a board where if we check to our opponents, they're going to telegraph their hand strength much, much more. If they have a good hand here, they just tend to size up. If they have a weak hand here, they just tend to bet half pot or smaller. Much more on this type of board. As opposed to if the board is something like this, ace 9 deuce. This board is static. Pocket aces are going to be the nuts across the majority of turn cards, and the board is dry. Not a lot of draws out there. On this board, even if they had a super strong hand like pocket twos or ace deuce suited, they may choose a smaller size. They're not going to telegraph here nearly as much because they're not scared of the turn bringing in a bad card. So the more wet and dynamic the board, the more they telegraph their hand strength with the sizing they choose when we check to them. All right, the next one, they tend to slow play quite a bit more when they are in position than when they are out of position. So let me show you an example of this. All right, so we're gonna open nines. Our opponent is going to call. Flop comes queen 8-4, and a lot of the players in our stable back in the day, we started as a stable, right? We had 25 players plus across the country that were playing with our money, and our MO at the time, 3+ years ago, guys, it was just c-bet everything out of position. And our players kept getting into predicaments where they would c-bet a hand like pocket nines, and the button would call, and we go to a turn and they check it over, and then the button would stab here on the turn, and now they're in kind of no man's land. They don't really know what to do because they get in spots here all the time where after the button had just called on the flop, they ended up here on the turn with some strong hands like pocket eights and pocket fours and queen 8 suited. And the thing is, we started realizing is players in position, even when the board is wet and dynamic, they do tend to slow play to a bet much more often, even if, guys, we need to be able to separate these two concepts. When we check to them, they just telegraph their hand strength with their size. They just start betting with all of their good hands. But when we bet and they are in position, they do tend to have some traps even on wet dynamic boards. Whereas, let's look at this when we are in position and they are out of position and we c-bet small on this board. In this spot, they just don't slow play when they call. When the board is wet and dynamic and they're out of position, they trap way less when they have hands like eights, fours, queen 8 suited. Whereas when they are in position and we c-bet, that's where they trap quite a bit more. So add this pattern to your toolkit. All right, guys, the next one, and this is a two-parter. The bigger we c-bet, the more scary it is when they check raise, the less it's going to be a bluff, right? If we c-bet big and they check raise, it's going to be much stronger. Or when they check raise to a big size, going to be much stronger. So this is two parts. Let me show you a couple examples of this. All right, so let's say we have ace king, we open, and flop comes king 8-4, and let's say on this flop we choose a big size. We choose an overbet size because we think our opponent's not going to fast play all that often on this board, and now our opponent check raises 4x. Guys, this is just going to be massively strong. This is going to be so strong when they check raise an overbet on the flop and they check raise to $300, right? This is going to be incredibly strong. Okay, this is also going to be strong, not quite as strong, but still very strong. Say we c-bet here for half pot and our opponent check raises to 5x, right? They check raise to 125. This is still going to be very strong. It's going to be weighted very heavily towards value when they choose this big check raise size on the flop. As opposed to this, let's say we c-bet and they check raise 3x or slightly less than 3x. This one is going to be weighted more towards hands that are finding out where they're at. Maybe hands like king x, maybe some draws, right? This is going to be much weaker. Their check raise size, if their check raise size is big, it's going to be weighted towards strength. And if we c-bet big and they still check raise, it's going to be heavily weighted towards strength. So add this pattern to the old noggin. All right, the next one on the flop, the more dry and static the board, the more they trap, even when they are out of position. So we're going to open ace queen here. Our opponent calls, flop ace 7 deuce. And this is the board, right? This is the board where they are going to trap quite a bit. Even if we choose a small c-bet size, if they have a hand like sevens, if they have a hand like deuces, they got a hand like ace 7 suited, this is the board where they trap quite often compared to a board like this, right? This board is more dynamic, right? More turn cards change than nuts. This board is wet. There is a flush draw out there. There is a straight draw out there. This is the board where our opponents do not trap at nearly as high of a frequency. All right, guys, last one for the flop. This is a good one. The min raise is usually not going to be nutted hands. So let me show you. We open Quigley's, our opponent calls. We're going to c-bet here, and now our opponent check raises to 60, right? So they check raise this 2.5x size here. This is just not going to be nutted, right? If they had a hand like nines or deuces or even jacks, right, they're going to check raise to a bigger size. What does this mean? Either they're just taking a stab at it with whatever, with air, with some type of draw, whatever, they're just trying to fold us right now, or they've got a hand like ace jack, king jack, and they're trying to put in a little more money because their hand is worth $60, but it's not worth 100 or 125 or whatever. So take this for what it's worth, guys. Against a lot of players when they choose this size, going with a bet 3-bet here is going to be very, very effective when we do have a bluff, right? If we want to maximize fold equity, if we have a hand like queen 10 of clubs or something like that here, going for the bet 3-bet and choosing a small size, right? Even 120, 150, still making sure we want them to call when they have Jack X, then we can get them to fold later. Going for the bet 3-bet going to be very effective as a bluff. For value here, I find often just calling is best. And usually what happens is we pray for a blank turn, and if we get a blank turn, oftentimes they will check, and then we can go for the over bet on the turn, and this looks way weaker to them. They're checking to check call. They're just not going to fold when they have a jack. If they were just check raising willy-nilly with air or some type of gut shot or whatever, or when they check the turn, they're done with it anyway. So I like to just kind of call when we have our strong hands and then go for a big bet on the turn when they do follow up with a check, and they will follow up with a check quite often. All right, let's move along to the turn. Going to give you 5 more patterns here for the turn. The flop check back and then the turn raise after checking back the flop. This is severely underbluffed, one of the most underbluff lines in all of poker, so let me show you. So remember this hand from our ranging example. We open with queen jack, we're gonna call, flop goes check check, and now on the turn we go for a $100 bet, and now our opponent raises. This is massively underbluffed. If you guys remember when we talked about this, why it's underbluffed is because if they had air or they had a draw and they're an aggressive player, they would just pounce on the flop. They would just start c-betting on the flop, right? So what does it mean once they check back the flop and raise the turn? Generally, guys, this is going to be hands that picked up a combo draw on the turn or hands that were trapping on the flop. And if the turn is a blank, we know what it's going to be. It's just going to be the big traps, right? This line is under bluffed. Use it to your advantage to start over folding. All right, guys, next one. If you've watched any of the Hungry Horse videos, you know this one. You guys know the last time someone check raised bluffed a turn, George Washington Carver was president of the United States of America. So let me show you. Cutoff opens. We're going to 3-bet Kigley's. Cutoff calls. We're going to c-bet. Cutoff calls. We go to the turn. We are going to double barrel. And now we face a check raise jam all in. Not a bluff. And okay, listen, it's a bluff 1 out of 36 times. They're throwing paper 90% of the time, guys. So what should we do? We should just throw scissors all of the time, right? And scissors in this situation, in this convoluted example, is just folding. We should just fold. We should just fold all of the time, because the last time someone check raised bluffed a turn, George Washington Carver, president, the peanut guy, you know? Similar spot, guys. If we overbet and we get check raised, just not gonna be a bluff. We have tens. We are going to c-bet. Our opponent calls. We overbet on the turn. Our opponent check raises. Again, guys, when you see an overbet and then a check raise, massively underbluffed. Next one, guys, when they follow up a flop donk with a large bet on the turn, again, this is going to be underbluffed. So let's talk about it. All right, we are going to open. Our opponent is going to call. They donk here on the flop. And when our opponents donk, generally, this is just going to be bullshit. It's mostly going to be bullshit. And personally, in these situations, I like to just call. When I have good hands, when I have bad hands, when I have everything in between, because if our opponent has bullshit, right, I want to keep letting them bet when they have bullshit. I don't want them to fold, both when we have a bluff, both when we have value. I want them to keep putting in money. And with our bluffs, we can get them to fold later. And with our value, we don't want them to fold. So let's let them keep putting in money when they have BS. We're going to call. Turn is a 6. And look, now something has changed. Our opponent has gone nearly pot on this turn. So if our opponent went 45, 50, even 60 on this turn, right? I'd be calling quite a bit with 8s. If we had a bluff here and our opponent went 45, I'd be raising quite a bit if we had air, if we had a draw. But when our opponents follow up a flop donk with a big bet on the turn, what does this mean? They now like their hand. Guys, this is just going to be trips a lot. It's going to be very strong hands a lot. It's going to be under bluffed. All right, guys, final one for the turn, and this one is gold. I hear a lot of players say, well, Mark, the players in my games, they don't raise their strong stuff. They just trap me. They just trap all the time. So here you go. Even trappy players just can't resist and will start raising off their good hands by the turn if we choose a small size again. They just won't be able to help themselves. Let me show you. We are going to 3-bet with pocket 9s on the button, and we flop the nuts. We're going to c-bet. Our opponent calls. Turn is a king. And let's say our opponent is trappy. Let's say our opponent is the type to just call with a hand like 7s or 4s, especially in a 3-bet pot. So what do we do here on the turn? If our opponent is the trappy type, that means they are uncapped. We give them one more chance to cap themselves. And what happens all of the time, guys, even the trappy players, if you choose a small size, they start thinking, oh my God, he's just betting with, pocket jacks here, pocket queens. I don't want the river to go check, check. I need to start putting in money now. I've waited 16 hours to flop a set. Please, let's put in more money. They put in more money. They put in more money. You just need to give them 2 chances. And the way to give them 2 chances is to go small one more time, right? If you go big on the turn, they may not fast play again. They're just going to call because they're going to expect you to bet the river. You go small twice, they start fast playing. Even the trappy players, they just can't help themselves, guys. All right, let's move along to the river. And these 5 are just pure gold. I actually can't believe I'm giving these away in a YouTube video, to be completely honest with you guys. I normally save these for Basecamp. Basecamp, by the way, is our 5-day interactive intensive training. We hold your feet to the fire and give you 2, 3, 4 hours a day of intense training, intense coaching in small groups. This is not some passive study where you're looking at a bunch of flowcharts and solver outputs. No, this is us putting your feet to the fire in real time and practicing this stuff, because we believe the practice should be harder than the play. And if you're not practicing this stuff off the table, how are you actually going to get better? Right? If you're a part-time player who wants to run circles around the guys who are playing for a living, but you've got family responsibilities, right? You've got a full-time job and you don't have a bunch of time to get better at poker. That's what our 5-day Basecamp was built for. And on top of that, after the 5 days, we're not just going to throw you away and leave you in the dust. No, we're going to give you 2 months of complimentary support on top of that. We're still going to give you twice weekly small group coaching calls, right? You can post up your hand histories and get feedback from myself, Gethen, our team of coaches within 24 to 48 hours. We'll put you in curated small study groups with other players who are in your time zone, who can meet up at the same time, work around your schedule so you can continue that active instead of passive practice multiple times per week, right? So if any of this sounds appealing to you, check out our 5-day Basecamp. All right, moving along to the river, the donk lead on the river after we have shown nothing but aggressive action, massively underbluffed. Let me show you. We open pocket 4s. Our opponent calls. We flop a set. We c-bet. They call. We're going to overbet on this turn. They call. Now the river brings in the front door flush. And now our opponent comes out and leads for 80% pot or whatever on this river. And when we open pre-flop, we c-bet on the flop. We overbet on the turn. And now our opponent comes in for a big size. They donk on the river. They're just letting you off the hook, guys. This is a flush. Sometimes it could also be a flush. And to be fair to them, they could occasionally be bluffing with a flush. We should just be folding, guys. This is so underbluff. All right, next one, guys, the small probe after we check back the flop and they probe the turn and then they fire the river again. This is actually going to be overbluffed. So let me show you. So we have 8-6 here. We open, flop comes ace high on these static boards, playing a big better check strategy. We're going to check back. Turn is a queen. Our opponent comes out and stabs on the turn. And when they stab on the turn for a half pot, 60% pot or smaller size, and then they come out and they follow it up on the river with a double barrel, guys, this is going to be overbluffed. Right? It's going to be overbluffed because in this situation, we have 1, we've given them rope by checking back the flop, and 2, they came out on the turn with a small size, right? And generally, after we check back the flop, they start to get a little bit greedy. If they have a good ace hex, if they have 2 pair, if they have a set, they start sizing up on the turn because they've waited all damn day to make a good hand. We've checked back the flop. They need to get a money. So when they come out with a small stab on the turn and they follow up on the river, going to be overbluffed. Pretty good spot to hero call them down if they come out with another small bet here on this river. Next one, guys, the small bet in position on the river is actually going to be underbluff. So let's talk about why this is different than from out of position. All right, so we're going to open queen jack. We get 3-bet. We're going to call. We flop top pair. Our opponent c-bets. We're going to call. Turn is a very wet 5 of hearts. Our opponent doubles. We're going to call. Now we go to the river, which is the innocuous deuce of diamonds. We check. Our opponent goes small here in position. Let me talk about why this is different than if they go small out of position. The reason being, when they choose a small size in position, they can just check with their bluffs, and we have to show first, right? If they missed here, if they bricked some type of draw, oftentimes they just check here because they don't have the embarrassment of having to show. We have to show our hand first, and they can just muck, right? When they're out of position, they tend to use a small size as a bluff because if it goes check, check, they have to show their hand. They have to be embarrassed. Ah, I missed, whatever. They did something wrong. It feels bad to bluff, like they're lying or something like that. So I don't know. I guess I'm a big liar. But in position, guys, generally this is not going to be a bluff. And it's also not going to be the very top of their range, hands like pocket eights or pocket queens or a straight or whatever. This is generally just going to be thin value. They tend to kind of be pretty transparent with what they're trying to accomplish on these rivers. This is mostly just going to be thin value when they choose the small size in position on rivers. All right, next one, guys. This is a good one. This is a very, very good one. I know I keep saying they're good, but I promise this one is great. It's one of the best ones you've ever seen. Okay, on the river, generally, recreational players check rivers to check call. Regs or pros check rivers to check fold. So let me show you a couple examples. So we're against a rec. They're going to open from under the gun. We defend on the button and we flop a flush draw. We're going to call. We turn a pair plus a flush draw. We're going to call again. Now they check on the river. And generally when recs check the river, they are checking to check call. Why? When they double barrel and then they check the river, they're just going to have a lot of value hands, right? Because when they double barrel the turn as the pre-flop raiser, they just don't double barrel nearly enough with bluff. So getting to the river, when they check, they're checking to check call. They have hands here like kings, aces, right? They have hands here like king, queen suited. In general, a rec's range when they check the river is going to be much stronger than a pro's range. So what does that mean for us? Let's just put all the money in, right? I would not be bluffing this spot for a big size ever in a million years. I'm not expecting our opponent to fold when they have kings, aces, ace, queen, king, queen, right? They're not checking to fold these hands. So I would go absolutely egregious here for value. Now, against a pro, same spot. When a pro checks in this spot, pros tend to value bet quite thinly. If a pro here has a hand like kings, aces, ace, queen, what are they going to do on this river? They're probably going to value bet. On top of that, pros tend to double barrel as a bluff much more than recreational players, so they just get here with a bunch of hands that are give-ups rather than hands that are checking to check call. So against a pro here, when we have a very good hand, I'm expecting their range to be mostly give-ups here. They're not going to check with kings, aces, ace, queen. Their range is just going to be busted draws, hands that are giving up on this river, right? So what would I do against a pro here? I may go very, very small, a disrespectful size, just trying to entice them to check raise us, just trying to entice them to spaz when they have a give up here. So very different situation versus a rec than versus a pro. All right, last one on the river. Fish in general don't value bet thinly enough and they don't triple barrel bluff enough. So that means when we make a hand on the river, we should just be donking when we are out of position quite a bit. So let me show you how this works. All right, so we have 8-7 here and our opponent's going to 3-bet. We're gonna call with a direct suited connector. We flop a flush draw, call the C-bet. On the turn, we make a pair to go along with our flush draw. We're gonna call once again. Now on the river, we get there. And a mistake that a lot of players make here is they just blindly check it over to the recreational player on the button. But the thing is, even if this player has a super strong hand, right? Pocket nines, ace, king, they may just check back here because they're terrified of the flush. They don't value bet thinly enough. And on top of that, recreational players fish in this spot. They don't triple barrel nearly enough with their bluffs. So if they did have a complete airball here, like Jack 10 of spades or something like that, oftentimes they just give up with that hand as well. So by checking here, we're not going to get the thin value bets from their two pair of sets. We're not going to get the triple barrel from their bluffs. So against these type of players, we generally just want to put in the money for them because just because they're not going to bet with a hand like ace king or pocket nines or whatever doesn't mean they're ever folding that hand in a million years if we put the money in for them. Now, where do we not do this? We don't want to do this against aggressive players, against regs, against pros, against players who are going to value bet thinly enough and against players who are going to triple barrel enough as a bluff. We don't do that against those players, but against passive players, it is absolutely a punt not to put in the money for them on this river. All right, guys, step number 3, if I was trying to make 50K plus a year as a part-time player, I would build that repeatable thought process. I know we talk about this a lot on this channel, but what does actually building that repeatable thought process look like? What does that mean? And for everybody, this is going to be different. It's going to be different for every person. Whatever questions you have to ask that help you get to the right decision, that's going to be the repeatable thought process you need to build. But for me, here's what my repeatable thought process looks like, guys. So number 1, what's their range? We worked on that at the start, right? The first question I ask always, what is their range? Next question I ask, what happens if? So what does this mean? What happens if? Well, instead of saying, hey, I'm going to bet because, or I'm going to check because, I do the opposite, right? First, I consider what happens if I take each action, right? What happens if I check here? How does my opponent react? What happens if I bet small here? How does my opponent react? What happens if I bet big here? How does my opponent react? So overall here, just considering what happens if I take each action. which action is going to accomplish what I want to accomplish with my hand. And finally, when we're on the river, I ask the inverse question. And the inverse question is simply, if we have a bluff on the river, we ask, well, if we had value here, what size would we bet to get them to call? And if we have value on the river, we simply ask, what size would I bet if I had a bluff to get them to fold? So we ask simply what we would do with the inverse. So let me show you how I put this all together. Hopefully this is illuminating and it helps you guys start to build your own custom repeatable thought process that works for you. All right, here we go. We are going to open Queen Jack of clubs. We're bringing this all together from the start, guys, from when we first started with ranging. What is our opponent's range? It's just going to be good hands, right? They have good hands. Our hand good enough to call, so we are going to continue. We go to the flop, we check. Our opponent is going to c-bet here. Again, what is their range? Well, still good hands. All the hands they 3-bet with pre-flop, right? Probably still just going to be all those hands. We don't really gain a lot of information from this. So in this spot, what happens if I call? Well, if I call here, our opponent will probably double barrel with their high equity draws and the hands that are beating us. They'll probably slow it down on the turn if they do have showdown value. What happens if I check raise here? If I check raise, we're probably going to fold out all the hands we have crushed here, hands like jacks, nines, tens, maybe hands that are just air that are c-betting here, like ace, king. And then also if we check raise here, our opponent's just going to continue with the hands that have us in a really bad spot, like hands like pocket kings, pocket aces, ace queen, stuff like that. And also the big draws that are basically flipping with us or have a lot of equity against us. So check raising doesn't seem like the best option. I'm going to go with a call here. We go to the turn, which is a 3 of diamonds. We check. Our opponent is going to check this back. Now at this point, what is our opponent's range? Well, we can eliminate the very top of their range. They're not going to have the sets, the 2 pair, probably not going to have the over pairs, probably not top pair, top kicker. Their range going to be a lot of showdown value, maybe some draws, maybe some air. We go to the river, which is an ace, and at this point, we know our opponent's range. What happens if I check? So if we check, we're gonna get a lot of bets from our opponent here, specifically because the turn went check, check. The pot is not all that big. If I come out and bet small here, what happens? Well, if my opponent has ace X, they are always calling. If my opponent has a hand like nines, tens, jacks, I think those hands, even if we bet small, may be folding. What happens if we bet large here? Even if we overbet the pot, I think hands like ace king, ace jack, probably never folding after the turn goes check, check. I think they're calling with that. And then once again, we're folding out the hands that we beat, like nines, tens, jacks, etc. So betting small doesn't seem great. Betting large doesn't seem great. Checking does seem good because our opponents are going to bluff quite a bit with hands like king jack or jack nine or something that sees this as a good opportunity to bluff on the river when an ace comes. So we're going to check, and now our opponent is going to go 120. So what is our opponent's range? I think our opponent's range on this river is going to mostly be 1 pair ace X hands, right? They're not going to have hands like ace queen because those hands would just keep betting on the turn. I think it's going to be a lot of hands like ace king, maybe occasionally a hand like ace 10 of hearts or something like that. They're going to have a lot of 1 pair hands, and then they're also going to have some hands like king jack or king 10 or whatever that just gave up on the turn that are now bluffing. So what happens if we call? Well, we're going to be good here some of the time against those hands that are now bluffing on this river, but we're also going to lose to the single pair ace X hands. What happens if we check raise small? Well, maybe a hand like ace king, ace jack would call, maybe the weaker ace X would fold, maybe the bluffs would fold. What happens if we check raise all in? Aha, if we check raise all in here, I think hands like ace king, ace jack, ace 10 of hearts, these hands would start to fold. I'm not sure if we'd really ever get called on this river. Now let's bring in the inverse question to check our thinking. If I did have a hand like ace 8 suited on this river, what size would I go to try to get our opponent to call with ace king? Well, I probably wouldn't go all in, right? I don't think our opponent would call a jam here. If I had a hand like ace 8 suited, maybe I'd go 350, 400, something like that, because I think our opponent would fold if I went all in. So we see how this is helpful, bringing in what would I do if I had value, because we think if we had value, we'd go medium, maybe smallish to try to get our opponents to call because we think they fold if we went all in. So what do we do here with queen X? Let's just jam. We think we can get our opponents to fold everything. Aha, repeatable thought process in action. There you go. Let's give you one more example. All right, we open again. Our opponent 3-bets. What is their range? Gonna be good hands. Let's keep it simple, pre-flop, right? We're gonna go to the flop. Our opponent c-bet. And now our opponent is going to check. So what is our opponent's range when they check? Well, we can probably eliminate a lot of the thick value. Our opponent's range is going to be some showdown value, some thin value, maybe hands like pocket jacks, maybe some air and some draws. We can just eliminate the thick value. Maybe occasionally they'll have a trap here I can play for stacks hand. We're going to go to the turn. Turn is a 3 of diamonds. And now on the turn, we know our opponent's range. What happens if, right? What happens if we come out and bet small here on the turn? Well, in general, if we come out and bet small, our opponent's going to call with all of their 9s, 10s, jacks, stuff like that. Maybe ace king on a board this wet would even call a small bet. What happens if we come out and bet large? Well, our opponents might start folding the ace king, stuff like that. If we come out and bet large, maybe the 9s, 10s, jacks, maybe call 1 bet even for a large size. What happens if we check? Well, our opponent's probably going to stab with their showdown value. Maybe they start stabbing with their air here as well, but mostly if they were going to bet with their air, they'd probably bet it on the flop, so we're not missing much value against air here. So maybe in this situation, either we want to go small, we want to make sure that a hand like ace king calls, or we choose that big size here on the turn and try to target hands like pocket 9s, pocket 10s, pocket jacks that just aren't folding. So we are going to come out and bet. Now our opponent raises, and what is our opponent's range? Well, again, we talked about this earlier. Their range now at this point is just going to be can play for stacks hands, the hands that check back, the hands that we're trapping, maybe hands like pocket queens, maybe hands like pocket 8s, and now hands that have turned a big combo draw, maybe hands like ace 5 of diamonds, or hands like 5, 6 of diamonds or something like that. So their range going to be strong combo draws and maybe top set. We've got a queen in our hand, makes it a little bit less likely they've got top set. So we're going to call, see what transpires on the river. River's a 5 of diamonds. What is our opponent's range? At this point, their range is going to be flushes and sets, essentially. What happens if we come out and bet small here? Well, we're just going to get called by everything that's beating us. What happens if we bet big? Well, there is no big size. We only have half pot left behind. What happens if we check? Well, our opponent probably just puts in the money anyway. So we are going to come out and check here. Now our opponent jams. What is the range? The range is going to be flushes and sets. We don't beat any of this. So what are we going to do? We are going to fold. All right, so we've talked about how to range. We've built some pattern recognition, and now we've talked about how to assemble the building blocks of a repeatable thought process. The next thing I want to talk about is session management. How do we get the most out of our session and make sure we are playing our A game in the limited hours we have to spend? Say you've only got 10 hours a week, 15 hours a week to spend at the casino. We want to make sure we are locked in playing our A game, right, the entire time. So here's how I do that. In general, when I am playing at the table, I always try to do my best to prioritize process over results. What does that mean, right? Process is going to be the decisions we make, right? If we think we make a good decision and we get sucked out on, that's okay. Doesn't matter, right? We're just going to throw that away. That's okay. But if we think we make a bad decision, if we didn't go through our repeatable thought process, if we forgot to range in a hand, if we made just a bad process decision, even if it works out results-wise, for me, that's going to be a strike. So I'm going to tell you what this looks like, but first, I'm going to give you examples of what these strikes look like process-wise. So if you guys find this helpful, you can add it to your own game. All right, so example of a strike. The button is going to open. We're going to defend in the big blind with 7-8. We check it over, and our opponent checks it back. Now we start thinking on the turn. What is our opponent's range? Well, our opponent's range is going to be, some showdown value, maybe some air. So I'm going to come out and bet here because I think I can get a lot of that too. You see what we did wrong already, guys? Instead of considering what happens if, we skipped the step in our repeatable thought process and just said, I'm going to bet because, instead of what happens if I check, what happens if I bet small, what happens if I bet large, right? Instead of considering the repeatable thought process, we just came out and decided on an action and then started supporting the action with whys. For me, this is a strike. This is an example of a strike. May not end up bad results-wise. Maybe our opponent just folds, but process-wise, we skipped our repeatable thought process. This is a strike for me. This would be strike 1. Another example here, we open on the button and a fish is going to 3-bet in the small blind, and we're like, well, you know what? I've got a skill edge, I've got a suited king, so I'm going to call here without even considering that the fish in the small blind started this hand only $500 deep, only 100 big blinds. This is not going to be a profitable call starting 100 big blinds deep. And look, we flop 4 of a kind. Great. So the result is great, but the process, guys, the process is bad. In this situation, I would consider this a strike. strike because I did not consider that the fish in the small blind started this hand $500 deep. One more example, we open a 6 and a super tight guy in the small blind is going to 3-bet us. And in this situation, I start thinking, well, you know, I should be 4-betting polar here. I should be building some 4-bet bluffs. And I put in a 4-bet bluff and this guy just jams it in our faces. So again, the results here are also bad, but the process is going to be the main thing. Process bad. When a tight guy 3-bets us from the small blind, does not matter. This is a wide versus wide configuration. This guy's going to be under 3-betting. We should not be 4-betting any bluffs. We should not have any bluffs because this guy's going to be too tight. So we should just be stuffing it in, right? We should be 4-betting whenever we have hands that can just kind of cooler him. Kings, aces. Maybe that's really it in this spot. That should be our 4-bet range. That's the exploit here, not just blindly going with a polar 4-bet range because that's what the chart says to do. This would be a strike for me process-wise. All right, so how do I do this? This is what has worked for me over the years. Strike one, I take a 5-minute break, right? I just get up from the table, go to the bathroom, quick lap around the casino. I just note in my head, hey, we've made a mistake. We need to breathe for a minute. We need to walk around. Let's make sure we're emphasizing that repeatable thought process in every hand, but I'm just gonna take a 5-minute break. Strike two, this is a 30-minute break. At this point, I'm gonna go outside. I'm gonna smoke a joint. I'm gonna do what I have to do to completely reset, take some distance away from the table. I have now made 2 strikes process-wise, so I'm gonna give myself a couple laps. We're gonna take some time away from the table. We're gonna walk away for 1 whole dealer down and take a break here. Strike 3, I make 3 strikes, I go home. Right, guys, it doesn't matter if the game is a 10 out of 10, A+. I can't count the amount of times before I really forced myself to use a system where I'm in an amazing game and I'm playing like garbage and I just justify to myself like, hey, you need to stay. This game is good. Games aren't good this often. And I end up punting off 500, 600, 800 big blinds because I'm not playing my best. So a lot of people ask me, they're like, Mark, do you have a stop loss? How much do you bring to the casino? I don't think about any of that, guys. I don't care if I'm down 1,000 big blinds or I'm up 1,000 big blinds. I'm thinking about the process, not the results. I try not to let the results affect any of my decision making ever. It's all about the process. Am I making good decisions? And if I am, whether I'm up, down, whatever, I'm staying, I'm sticking around. That is going to be the plan, right? And if I'm not making good decisions, if I'm making bad decisions process-wise, even if the results are great, if I'm making bad decisions process-wise, I give myself 3 strikes, right? And if I hit 3 strikes, I go home. This works for me. Maybe it'll work for you. This is how I ensure I am playing my A game and getting the most out of my hours at the table. All right, guys, so we've talked about the on-table plan, how to make sure we maximize our time at the table. Now, finally, let's wrap this up. Let's talk about what to do away from the table, because if you've only got 15 hours a week to play, 10 hours a week to play, we have to make sure that those hours we're spending off the table are absolutely maximized. We're absolutely dialed in and we're getting value out of those hours. First, here's what we should not do. Passive learning, passive training, right? Watching a bunch of training videos, watching a vlog, studying a range chart, right? This is passive. This is not going to get us to where we want to be. Second thing we should not do is memorize, right? Memorizing pre-flop ranges, looking at a solver output and memorizing what the response is on the flop. This is not going to get us to where we want to be. Third thing we should not do, and this is a big one, I see people trip this one up all the time, is building the perfect plan, the perfect study plan, right? Before I study, I'm gonna get myself in the right mindset. I'm gonna go do a cold plunge and then go jump in the infrared sauna. And then I'm gonna have a cup of coffee with exactly 47 milligrams of caffeine. Just stop. Don't spend so much time on building the study plan that we actually forget to put in the work. And actually, so many people are so crazy about optimizing their routine, they never get to the routine, right? It's never going to be perfect, but if we have limited hours to study, we have to make sure we actually utilize that time and don't waste the time doing frivolous bullshit that isn't going to get us closer to our goal. All right, guys, so what do we want to do? How do we want to utilize the study time? First, literally just get a deck of cards, guys. Get a deck of cards, deal yourself a hand, deal yourself flops, deal the opponent a hand, and just practice ranging, right? Start off visually. And then once we can do it in our heads, once we can do it out loud, start off with no timer. Give yourself all the time in the world. After that, once you've gotten pretty good at it, you've done hundreds and hundreds of reps. The goal is we should ideally be able to range our opponents in 15 seconds or less, because If you're sitting there at the poker table, every decision taking 5 minutes, people are going to get pissed off at you. People aren't going to want to play with you, right? So we need to be able to range them ideally in 15 seconds or less so we can spend the rest of the time on our repeatable thought process, right? So ranging. Finally, after we've got the ranging down, we just drill our repeatable thought process over and over and over again. First, we start off no time pressure. Get your repeatable thought process. What works for you? We talked about what works for me, guys. It's literally what is their range, what happens if, and then we add the inverse question on the river. For you guys, maybe you want to start off a little bit more granular. Maybe you need 2 or 3 more questions in there to help you get to the right answers. That's okay. That's great. So practice a repeatable thought process with no time. Do it out loud. Add a minute shot clock, right? Add 1 minute. We're going to range in 1 minute. Then add a 30-second shot clock. Then when we master that, finally, 15-second shot clock. We have 15 seconds to range our opponent on every street. And that's all we practice over and over and over and over again till we can get it to 15 seconds or less. And it's going to be hard. It's going to be difficult. But if you can do this off the table and you can push yourself so hard that you're ranging, you're doing your repeatable thought process in 15, 30 seconds, well, when you're on the table, all of a sudden, everything is going to start to feel easy. If we make the study we do off the table harder than it is when we are actually at the table, all of a sudden it's going to feel like we are seeing the Matrix when we are playing poker. This is all the sauce in this video. This is the sauce, guys. We are giving the sauce. And I have no doubt that a lot of you can get there on your own, right? But if you want to massively speed up that process, you want to get from A to Z without stopping at every letter in the alphabet between, that's what we specialize in. We can help you speed this process up. Our 5-day Basecamp, 5 days of interactive coaching in small groups, and then 2 months of continued complimentary support after that. If that at all sounds interesting to you, check out our 5-day Basecamp. Either way, guys, hope this video turns you into the biggest boy possible. Thank you guys, and have a gentle day.